I was engaged in any number of conversations, both within the White House and as well as on the Hill, about the issue of what constitutes an act of war in the world of cybersecurity. And no decision on that has been made yet. But it is critical that we make that decision. The attack against OPM, if that's not an act of war, I can't imagine what is. We know who did it. And yet, we've sat there and we've continued to get our nose bloodied, and we just turn the other cheek and we do nothing. We not only have got to make a decision on what does constitute an act of war, but what's our policy when somebody does commit that. We're not going to fly B-2 bombers over and bomb Beijing or whatever, but we have got to start taking some offensive actions against these intruders and against these nation-state sponsors of cybersecurity. So those decisions are still in process, but as we go forward, it's something you might just, some of it will be in the press, not a lot of it will be in the press, but I assure you those decisions are taking place today as we speak and have got to be made in the short term. Otherwise, we as a nation are just going to continue to be so vulnerable when it comes to the theft of information, whether it's proprietary or classified or intellectual property or money or whatever, for years to come. I've been fortunate to be able to keep my finger in the intel world. I serve on two advisory boards. One is the CIA Directors Advisory Board, and we meet quarterly. I'll be back in D.C. next week, and we'll be discussing the current events and whatnot. And then I serve on the advisory board to the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, which is the central point now that all suspected acts of terrorism are funneled into, and it's the role of the National Counterterrorism Center to distribute information out regarding anything anybody thinks is an act of terrorism. It's one thing we created, it's about the only good thing I can think of we created with the Intelligence Modernization Act of several years ago. But it has allowed me to kind of stay tuned, but as a result of being on those boards, I had to get top secret clearance, and as a senator, you just have it. So I had been hearing all these things. Now, all of a sudden, to hear what I now hear, I had to go through and get my top secret clearance. Well, guess who did the background checks? OPM. So the Chinese have all of my personal information. Dean, I guess they've got my my transcript from the University of Georgia, which they could hold me hostage over that. And say, but it has allowed me to continue to do something that I thoroughly enjoy as a result of the 20 years that I spent in Congress. Well, I'm going to stop because I'd like to be able to take some questions for a little while here. You said we got about 15 or 20 minutes, and I think there are microphones out there. So anybody that has a question or anything you want me to comment on, please just raise your hand and they'll give you a microphone.
Senator, thank you for your words today. Really, really interesting stories, and you kind of got to something that I was wondering about right, towards the end of your talk. With the OPM hack, in my view, it's exponentially a bigger deal, or an exponentially bigger deal than the Target hack, than the Home Depot hack, because that was taking credit card information. I mean, this is every employee, contractor, background, every piece of information. I guess you hit on some of the frustration that I feel, but what is being done about that particular hack and protecting our very, very trusted everybody associated with the government, and how maybe shed some light. I guess for me, I've read about it in the media and I've seen the director step down now and things like that, but it seems to be. It's amazing to me how little of a deal seems to have been made in the general public about this thing, and I'm sure there's good reason for that, but maybe speak a little bit more about that as well.
The OPM breach is significant in a couple of different ways. First of all, Chinese did it. I mean, we know that, and they have breached the database of one of our major agencies within the federal government. So what's next? They've tried the Pentagon. We get about 1 million hits at the Pentagon every day. And a lot of that is coming from nation-state actors, but we've got the sophisticated defensive mechanisms in place that have not allowed them to get information out of the Pentagon. But we did a poor job. In fact, I've written an article for a blog called Cipher One, which I'm on the board of, that'll be published Monday on this specific issue. And this has got to be a wake-up call for us from the standpoint of what we do, not only with defensive mechanisms, but offensive mechanisms. The conversation now needs to go public. It's been private in classified settings. It now needs to go public because the American people need to understand what we're doing and why we're not taking any action against these nation-state actors that come after us. And we pretty well know when something happens. We figure it out quickly enough to know whether it was some 15-year-old in his garage down the street who was trying to intrude into our space, or whether it was criminal activity or a nation state. And we've got the ability to take some action, and we've got to set that policy. What I would do is what I said in this blog. There are lots of good former leaders in the intelligence and law enforcement community out there who understand the corporate world, who are very capable of leading a real investigation into what's happening within every agency relative to the defensive mechanisms that we have in the cyber world, and what do we need to do going forward. I recommended 3 people: Bob Mueller, the former director of the FBI, Admiral McConnell, former director of national intelligence, and Leon Panetta, who is former CIA director and former Secretary of Defense. It's men like that or women like that that would be great at leading an investigation and giving them authority and resources to really do something and then have it followed through. If we don't do that, I'm just afraid that we're going to see every agency ultimately hacked, and ultimately lots of private information, more so than the 21 million. And when you think about 21 million Americans' personal and sensitive information being breached, that's 1 in every 15 Americans. I mean, just think how many of you in this room that involves. So, I mean, this is real, and it's very personal. I've already seen some instances where they've come after my credit cards, and I don't know how they got it out of that, but I guess you have to give them all your financial information when you go through one of these background checks. So I guess that's the way they got it. I don't know, but this is real, and it's going to be felt by lots of Americans. And the worst part of it, not unlike the Snowden incident, which I hope none of you have any sympathy for him, because we need to hang him on the courthouse square as soon as we get our hands on him. But just like with Snowden, we're going to lose American lives as a result of this breach. And the reason we are is because the Chinese now have possession of all of our folks who have gone through background checks over the last 20 years. They know where the CIA agents are, even though there was some firewall on some CIA background checks. They do have information relative to where some of those folks are, and who they are and what their cover is, and it's creating a very, very serious situation for us from that standpoint.